Renting in America is basically speed dating, except the landlord keeps the deposit and the tenant brings emotional support poultry. Today, you're getting 69 of the craziest landlord and renter complaints ever recorded. Oxygen surcharges, stair passes, toilet paper rules, and fees for existing too loudly. If any of this sounds familiar, congrats, you've lived in the wild. 1. A property manager in Seattle once opened an official maintenance request at 3 in the morning, where a tenant demanded a full reimbursement for new curtains. The reason? She claimed the bright yellow color was vibrating at a frequency that agitated the local squirrels and turned them into aggressive tiny monsters. She seriously expected the management company to hire a professional animal psychic to prove the drapes weren't inciting a rodent revolution before she would agree to pay her next utility bill. 2. Imagine a landlord who treats the security deposit like a personal challenge. One renter in Miami received a formal lease violation notice because he was supposedly using too much oxygen in the common areas. The landlord had actually installed air quality sensors and sent an itemized bill for $300, claiming the tenant was breathing too aggressively and wearing out the ventilation system faster than scheduled. He threatened to change the locks unless the tenant agreed to a shallow breathing surcharge every month. 3. We all know landlords can be stingy, but one tenant in Ohio filed a formal complaint with the housing board because her landlord fixed a leaky sink too quickly. She claimed the rhythmic dripping of the water was the only thing helping her compose her avant-garde jazz album, and that the repair was a direct violation of her creative freedom. She demanded a 2-month rent credit as compensation for the loss of her organic metronome, citing artistic damages in her handwritten 12-page manifesto. 4. Some landlords just do not understand boundaries. A woman in Austin discovered her landlord had added a mandatory social interaction clause to her lease agreement during the renewal process. Every Tuesday night, he would knock on the door and demand a 45-minute debrief about her dating life and career progress. When she finally locked the door and ignored him, he sent a legal notice claiming she was in default for failure to maintain a communal atmosphere and tried to charge her a Lonely Hearts convenience fee. 5. In a legendary dispute from San Francisco, a third-floor tenant faced immediate eviction because he was supposedly using too much gravity. The landlord actually showed up with a digital level and a laser pointer, claiming the tenant's heavy weightlifting rack was compressing the building's molecular structure. He insisted that the ground floor ceiling had dropped by 3 millimeters and demanded the tenant pay for a structural reinforcement project that cost more than the entire year of rent. 6. A guy in New Jersey thought he found a great deal until he realized his landlord had a secret ban on all things spicy. After cooking a basic curry, he received an urgent email from management stating that the aroma was technically a chemical weapon that violated the building's hazardous materials policy. The landlord demanded a professional $5,000 industrial cleaning and tried to force the tenant to sign a new agreement promising to only eat cold sandwiches and unseasoned crackers for the remainder of the year. 7. A landlord in Florida once got a frantic midnight call from a tenant who insisted there was a high-tech government spy drone in her bedroom. When the property owner arrived, he found the woman pointing a broom at a very confused moth fluttering near a lamp. She filed a formal police report and demanded the landlord install military-grade signal jammers throughout the complex, claiming the insect was recording her sleep-talking and sending the data directly to the Central Intelligence Agency. 8. A landlord in New York City tried to solve the water bill by installing a coin-operated flush handle on the apartment's only toilet. Tenants had to drop a quarter in every time they wanted to flush, and he called it a premium conservation amenity. When residents complained, he threatened a $50 wasteful water fine for anyone who double-flushed and charged extra for providing change. 9. A tenant in Arizona sent a certified letter to his landlord claiming his neighbor's microwave was remagnetizing his credit cards through the drywall. He did not just want the neighbor to move the appliance, though. He demanded that the landlord hire a specialized contractor to install lead-lined wallpaper across the entire unit to create a survivalist Faraday cage. He withheld his rent for 3 months, insisting that the invisible radiation was making his bank account balance drop by itself. 10. Imagine being evicted because your landlord thinks your apartment is haunted and you are not paying the extra ghost rent. In a bizarre case from New Orleans, a landlord tried to increase the monthly payment by $500 because he claimed he saw a Victorian-era spirit sitting in the tenant's living room. He argued that the spirit counted as an unauthorized long-term guest and that the tenant was responsible for the additional wear and tear caused by supernatural activity on the floorboards. 11. A tenant in Denver emailed her property manager at 4 in the morning demanding a rent reduction because the neighbor's negative aura was supposedly wilting her houseplants. She claimed the bad vibes were traveling through the air vents and that the landlord was legally responsible for maintaining a spiritually neutral environment. She even attached photos of a droopy fern as evidence, threatening to report the building to the Better Business Bureau if the neighbor wasn't forced to undergo an immediate energy cleansing to save her botanical collection. 12. A renter in Brooklyn received an itemized bill for $40 labeled as a floor impact surcharge because he dared to wear boots inside his own living room. The landlord claimed he could hear the structural integrity of the building crying every time a heel touched the hardwood and insisted the tenant only wear specialized soft foam slippers. When the tenant refused to comply, the landlord threatened to install a high-tech vibration sensor on the ceiling and charge him a $5 fee per step like a human pedometer. 13. One tenant in Chicago demanded his landlord pay for his monthly premium Netflix subscription because the building's Wi-Fi was slightly inconsistent. His logic was that the buffering caused a massive plot hole in the show he was watching, which led to emotional distress and a ruined weekend. He sent a formal letter explaining that since the internet was included in the rent, any lag was a direct breach of contract, and he refused to pay for his parking spot until the landlord covered his streaming costs. 14. A landlord in Atlanta tried to ban his tenants from cooking with onions or garlic after 5 in the evening, calling the savory scents a form of olfactory trespassing. He actually sent a cease and desist letter to a young couple making spaghetti sauce, claiming they were creating a hostile living environment through the use of aggressive seasoning. He even tried to install a custom smoke detector that was specifically calibrated to sense high levels of sautéed vegetables and trigger a $50 fine for every violation. 15. A maintenance worker in Las Vegas discovered a tenant had secretly converted his second bathroom into a fully functional indoor chicken coop. When the landlord issued an immediate eviction notice, the tenant filed a counter-complaint claiming the birds were his emotional support flock and their clucking was a medical necessity. He insisted the chickens were cleaner than most humans and demanded the landlord pay for a specialized air filtration system, citing fair housing laws as his ultimate legal shield to keep the birds in the bathtub. 16. A student in Boston realized her landlord was remotely controlling the thermostat from his phone and capping the heat at 55 degrees during a blizzard. When she complained that she could see her own breath in the kitchen, the landlord texted back saying that shivering is a natural way for the body to burn calories and she should be grateful for the free workout. He refused to turn the heat up unless she paid an additional $20 tropical climate fee for every hour of extra warmth. 17. A tenant in Maryland filed a formal police report against his landlord because the grass in the front yard was cut too short. He claimed he had spent months training the lawn to grow in a specific pattern that reflected his inner peace, and that the landlord's lawnmower had committed a crime against nature. He demanded the property owner pay for professional sod replacement and a therapist for his traumatized yard, refusing to pay his utility bill until the grass reached a minimum height of 6 inches. 18. In a legendary display of stinginess, a landlord in Philadelphia tried to charge his tenants for using the hallway lights. He installed a motion sensor linked to each individual apartment's electric meter, so if you stood in the hall for more than 10 seconds, you were paying for the glow. One tenant received a bill for 12 cents labeled as unauthorized illumination because he spent a minute fumbling for his keys, and the landlord actually threatened to take him to small claims court for wasting the building's light. 19. A tenant in Portland reached out to the local housing board because she believed her landlord had trained the local pigeons to spy on her balcony. She claimed the birds were wearing tiny cameras to check if she was violating the no-smoking policy and demanded the landlord pay for a high-tech sonic bird repellent system. When the landlord refused to provide the equipment, she stopped paying her rent and accused him of running a private domestic surveillance ring through the local wildlife. 20. A man in Phoenix was served an official lease violation because his landlord claimed he was dreaming too aggressively. The landlord lived in the unit below and insisted that the tenant's vivid nightmares were causing the floorboards to vibrate and creating a psychic disturbance throughout the building. He demanded that the tenant take herbal sleep aids to ensure a quieter subconscious or face a $100 nocturnal agitation fee on the first of every month for disturbing his landlord's peace of mind. 21. A landlord in Dallas tried to evict a tenant for having too many magnets on the refrigerator, claiming the combined magnetic field was interfering with the building's internal wiring. He sent a formal notice stating that the tenant was allowed a maximum of 2 magnets, provided they were not shaped like animals or food, as those were considered unprofessional and distracting to neighbors. The tenant responded by covering the entire fridge in metallic foil and claiming it was a necessary shield against the landlord's growing insanity. 22. A tenant in Los Angeles filed a formal complaint with the management company because her apartment wasn't Instagrammable enough for her personal brand. She claimed the natural light in the living room was 3 shades too warm, which ruined her aesthetic and caused her follower count to drop significantly. She demanded the landlord pay for a professional lighting crew to install studio-grade LEDs and a custom marble backdrop, arguing that the apartment's failure to be photogenic was a direct breach of her lifestyle expectations. 23. A property owner in California discovered that his tenant had replaced the bathtub with a giant koi pond without asking for permission. When the landlord naturally freaked out about the water damage and the structural weight, the tenant called the emergency maintenance line and claimed the fish were suffering from depression because the bathroom tiles were the wrong color. He demanded that the landlord install specialized aquarium heaters, arguing that the koi were now permanent residents entitled to a comfortable living environment under the Fair Housing Act. 24. A landlord in Salt Lake City once sent a formal itemized invoice for $50 labeled as a scenic maintenance fee because the tenant's cat sat in the front window too much. The landlord argued that the cat's judgmental stare was devaluing the property's curb appeal and scaring off high-end potential renters who walked by the building. He demanded the pet be moved to a back room during peak business hours or that the tenant pay an unprofessional animal display fine every month the cat was spotted. 25. One landlord in Portland issued a formal lease amendment requiring all tenants to use only one specific, expensive brand of organic lavender laundry detergent. He claimed that the generic scents coming from the dryer vents were polluting his private garden and giving his prized roses an identity crisis. When a tenant refused to switch from their budget brand, the landlord sent a hazardous scent violation notice and tried to charge the renter for a professional soil detoxification of the entire front yard. 26. A property owner in Ohio decided to fight the rising cost of utilities by installing a coin-operated locking cage over the tenant's own microwave without any warning. Every time the renter wanted to heat up a slice of pizza, they had to drop 2 quarters into a metal box welded to the counter. The landlord argued in a heated email thread that the microwave was an elective high-voltage luxury and that the tenant was essentially committing utility theft by using it without paying the extra cooking surcharge. 27. A renter in San Diego filed a formal complaint against their landlord because the neighbor's automatic ice maker was too aggressive during the middle of the night. They didn't just want it fixed. They demanded the landlord provide a $500 sleep deprivation credit to pay for a week at a luxury hotel. When the landlord refused to pay, the tenant sent an official invoice for professional soundproofing curtains and threatened to subtract the cost from the rent, calling the ice machine a clanking instrument of torture. 28. Think your landlord is strict? A guy in Austin received a written warning after he was caught whistling a pop song that the property owner personally disliked during a routine maintenance check. The landlord claimed the melody was a form of psychological harassment that violated the building's peaceful enjoyment clause. He threatened to increase the security deposit by $500 as a musical nuisance bond unless the tenant agreed to remain completely silent in all common areas or only whistle approved 18th century classical music. 29. A tenant in Tennessee demanded a 30% rent discount after spotting a single spider in the hallway and declared it an unauthorized long-term guest. He emailed management nonstop, insisting the landlord perform an emergency, unit-wide arachnid audit and provide written proof the spider had been removed permanently. When told it was one bug, he filed for emotional distress and tried to invoice the landlord for trauma counseling. 30. A landlord in Las Vegas implemented a mandatory guest check in FE that applied even to the tenant's own family members. He installed a facial recognition camera at the front door and sent an itemized bill for $15 every time an unrecognized face entered the apartment for more than 10 minutes. He argued that extra bodies caused accelerated wear and tear on the hallway carpet fibers and refused to renew the lease unless the tenant agreed to pre-register every visitor 48 hours in advance for security screening. 31. Imagine having a landlord who tries to control your bathroom habits. A property owner in New Jersey sent a building-wide memo banning one-ply or cheap generic toilet paper, claiming it was a direct threat to the building's ancient plumbing system. He actually performed random trash spot checks and issued a $50 sanitary non-compliance fee to any tenant caught with a budget brand in their garbage bin. He insisted that only premium, septic-safe brands were allowed to touch his pipes to ensure structural longevity. 32. One landlord in Pennsylvania became a local legend for going through his tenants' trash while wearing a full hazmat suit and a powerful headlamp. He would look for discarded food scraps that weren't properly composted and issue a $10 fine for every individual orange peel or coffee ground he found in the regular bin. He claimed he was protecting the building's ecological soul, but the tenants filed a collective grievance, accusing him of using their garbage to monitor their private dietary habits and overall financial status. 33. A tenant in Atlanta filed a formal request for a permanent rent reduction because the city renamed their street, and the new name didn't align with his personal brand. He argued that living on Oak Street was elegant, but the new name, Pioneer Way, sounded like he lived in a wagon and was hurting his professional reputation. He demanded the landlord pay for all his new business cards and provide a $100 rebranding allowance every month to compensate for the tragic loss of prestige. 34. A property owner in a 5-story building in Chicago actually tried to implement a vertical travel fee for any tenant living above the second floor. He argued that the extra steps were causing accelerated degradation of the staircase and that residents should pay a nickel for every flight they climbed. He even tried to sell monthly stair passes for $20, claiming it was a fair way to distribute the maintenance costs of gravity and the friction of shoes on his precious wooden stairs. 35. A tenant in Arizona filed a formal complaint against his landlord because the apartment's air conditioner was working too efficiently. He claimed the cool air was making his pet lizard feel insecure about its cold-blooded nature and demanded a $500 reimbursement for the reptile's psychological distress. He insisted the landlord pay for a specialized lizard-sized heating suit and a tiny infrared sun lamp, arguing that the apartment's high-quality insulation was a direct threat to his pet's spiritual comfort and mental well-being. 36. One landlord in Vermont decided to add a mandatory vibe check to his monthly property inspections. If he felt a tenant was being too grumpy or was not showing enough gratitude for the apartment, he would issue a $30 negative attitude surcharge. He claimed that a tenant's bad mood could seep into the drywall and make the unit harder to rent out to happy people in the future. He even sent a cease and desist letter to a guy who was going through a breakup, telling him to contain his sadness or face immediate eviction. 37. A property manager in Boston recently sent a tenant a $10 itemized invoice for what he called excessive doorbell friction. The landlord claimed that because the tenant received 3 Amazon deliveries in a single week, the frequent use of the button was wearing out the internal spring 10% faster than the manufacturer's intended lifespan. He demanded a $5 replacement deposit for every future visitor and suggested the tenant tell his friends to just throw a small pebble at the window instead of touching the hardware. 38. A renter in Denver demanded a rent credit because the provided toaster kept triggering the smoke detector and terrorizing his mornings with false alarms. He insisted the landlord replace it with a certified low-smoke model and reimburse him for wasted groceries, claiming every burnt slice was a documented breach of quiet enjoyment and breakfast safety. 39. Imagine a landlord who performs surprise inspections just to check if your wardrobe matches the apartment's aesthetic. A tenant in Dallas was fined $50 because his gym socks were a bright neon green that the landlord claimed visually clashed with the neutral beige carpet. The formal notice stated that the tenant was devaluing the psychological integrity of the room and demanded that he only wear earth tones or muted grays to ensure the property maintained a high-end professional atmosphere at all times. 40. A tenant in Houston filed a formal complaint demanding the landlord install privacy film on every ground floor window because the neighbor's golden retriever kept staring into his unit during morning walks. He called the eye contact unsanctioned surveillance and demanded a $200 rent credit unless the dog's line of sight was blocked immediately. 41. Some landlords will find any excuse to squeeze out an extra buck, like the property manager in Virginia who started charging a monthly freshness fee. After installing basic air fresheners in the hallway, he sent an itemized bill for $12 to every unit, claiming the tenants were consuming premium industrial scents without a proper subscription. He even threatened to remove the fragrance and replace it with a rotten egg smell if the residents didn't agree to the new olfactory surcharge by the first of the month. 42. A renter in San Francisco emailed management at 2 in the morning because the shadow from a courtyard tree made his bedroom wall look like a person staring at him. He demanded the landlord trim the branches immediately and submit before and after photos proving the creepy silhouette was gone. When the landlord suggested closing the blinds, the tenant filed for a rent abatement for maintaining a frightening exterior environment. 43. There is a landlord in Milwaukee who issued a formal noise violation to a tenant because her laughter was too melodic for a Tuesday night. The written warning stated that the woman's vocal happiness was distracting other residents from their rest and creating a carnival-like atmosphere that the building was not zoned for. He demanded she limit her audible joy to weekends only or pay a $30 entertainment tax for every midweek chuckle that could be heard through the thin drywall. 44. A tenant in Ohio stopped paying his utility bill because the landlord wouldn't build a specialized ramp for his pet turtle to access the balcony. He argued that the 3-inch drop from the sliding door was a form of reptilian discrimination and that his turtle was suffering from a lack of sunlight and a wounded ego. He sent a series of photos showing the turtle staring sadly at the doorframe and demanded the landlord pay for a custom miniature architectural upgrade to ensure the pet's mobility rights were respected. 45. One landlord in Colorado tried to implement a heavy metal fee after finding a single cast iron skillet in a tenant's kitchen during a smoke detector check. He claimed the weight of the pan was putting unnecessary stress on the molecular structure of the granite countertop and would eventually cause the kitchen to collapse into the unit below. He demanded a $50 monthly structural insurance payment to cover the potential gravitational damage caused by the tenant's choice of cookware and threatened to confiscate the pan if the fee wasn't paid. 46. A renter in Arizona filed a formal grievance because the landlord's shirt during a repair visit was a shade of blue that triggered his childhood anxiety. He claimed the specific color reminded him of a lost balloon from his 5th birthday party, and that the sight of it caused him to lose a full day of productivity. He demanded the landlord pay for a professional therapy session and sign a legal agreement, promising to only wear neutral tan or white clothing during all future interactions within the apartment. 47. A landlord in Florida sent a $5 fine to a tenant for what he called improper door handle rotation. He claimed he witnessed the tenant turning the knob counterclockwise with too much aggression, which was supposedly causing the internal locking mechanism to scream in agony and shorten its functional life. He insisted that all handles be turned slowly and only in a clockwise direction to ensure the hardware survived the duration of the lease, and threatened to install a rotation sensor to monitor compliance. 48. A tenant in Maine demanded a rent reduction because the lobby clock was ticking too loudly and violating his right to mental silence while he waited for the elevator. He insisted the landlord replace it with a silent digital display and threatened to deduct a daily noise penalty from his rent until the batteries were removed. 49. A property owner in Seattle tried to impose a bandwidth tax on anyone using more than 2 devices at once, claiming extra connections were hogging the building's network capacity. He sent a technician to scan for excessive streaming and slapped one tenant with a $15 monthly congestion fee for running a laptop, a smartwatch, and a TV at the same time. He called it digital traffic control. 50. A tenant in New Jersey demanded a rent credit because the dishwasher made judging noises during the rinse cycle, and she swore it was mocking her through the cabinet door. She insisted the landlord hire a technician to run a decibel test and replace the machine if it side-eyed her again, or she would withhold rent for emotional distress. 51. Imagine a landlord who treats a simple shower like a form of atmospheric terrorism. A renter in Portland received an itemized bill for $30 labeled as a humidity management surcharge because he took a 15-minute hot shower on a Tuesday. The landlord claimed the excessive steam was harassing the drywall, and that the tenant was essentially trying to turn the studio apartment into an unlicensed sauna. He even threatened to install a digital moisture sensor that would automatically lock the bathroom door if the steam levels got too high. 52. A tenant in Atlanta filed a complaint demanding the landlord ban all unapproved doormats because her neighbor's welcome mat had a sarcastic quote that she said was hostile messaging, aimed directly at her. She demanded a new building rule requiring neutral mats only and asked for a $100 rent credit for every day she had to walk past text-based harassment. 53. A landlord in Miami issued a formal lease violation notice for what he called a surface tension breach after seeing a photo of a tenant's nightstand on social media. The crime? A single glass of water sitting there without a coaster. Even though there was no actual damage, the landlord sent a $50 invoice for potential molecular warping of the wood grain. He argued that the mere presence of unshielded condensation was a form of slow-motion vandalism and demanded the tenant submit a weekly coaster compliance photo to prove the furniture was safe. 54. A renter in Detroit demanded a rent reduction because his apartment was too quiet, and the silence made him feel like he could hear the building judging him. He insisted management install an always-on hallway sound machine that played gentle fan noise, or reimburse him for a white noise setup, then threatened to stop paying utilities until the acoustic emptiness was fixed. 55. In a legendary display of audacity, a landlord in Chicago tried to implement a snow weight surcharge during a particularly heavy winter. He sent a notice to all top-floor tenants claiming that because they weren't actively brushing the snow off their private balconies every hour, they were tiring out the building's structural integrity. He tried to charge an extra $10 for every inch of accumulation, arguing that the tenants were essentially using his roof as unauthorized cold storage for frozen water and putting the entire foundation at risk of gravity fatigue. 56. A tenant in San Francisco demanded a rent credit because the mail carrier's daily deliveries were too distracting due to non-stop whistling and loud phone calls right outside his window. He claimed it ruined his focus for 30 minutes every morning and insisted the landlord contact the United States Postal Service to request a quieter route. When told no, he sent an invoice for blackout film and noise-reducing panels. 57. Think your inspections are tough? A landlord in Las Vegas once used a high-powered forensic flashlight to find a single grain of rice under a tenant's stove and immediately issued a $75 rodent invitation tax. He argued that the lone grain was a beaming signal for every cockroach in the desert to invade the building. He refused to cancel the fine even after the tenant proved the rice was plastic decor, claiming that the intent to be messy was just as dangerous as actual dirt for the property's reputation. 58. A tenant in Phoenix demanded a rent abatement because the parking lot security lights were blasting through her blinds all night like an interrogation room. She refused curtains because they trapped heat and demanded the landlord install a custom exterior shield and swap every bulb to a softer setting. When told no, she sent an invoice for blackout film and said she'd deduct it from rent. 59. One landlord in Nashville sent a tenant an invoice for a vocal cord usage fee after catching her on a Ring camera talking to her dog in a high-pitched baby voice. The landlord argued that those specific high-frequency sounds were causing micro-vibrations that could potentially loosen the screws in the drywall over time. He demanded a $15 monthly acoustic maintenance bond and suggested the tenant only speak to her pet in a professional mid-range baritone to ensure the structural longevity of the apartment unit. 60. A renter in Philadelphia filed a grievance because his refrigerator hum vibrated the floor at night and poisoned the vibe of his kitchen. He demanded the landlord pay for anti-vibration pads and a motor tune-up, then requested a monthly quiet appliance discount until the fridge stopped singing through the cabinets like a tiny, angry generator. 61. A landlord in Austin issued a lease violation notice for unauthorized vertical furniture after spotting a tenant's loft bed. He claimed sleeping that high trapped hot air, stressed the ceiling, and increased fire risk, then demanded a $75 monthly height surcharge or immediate removal. The tenant asked if the landlord also wanted to charge extra for standing up. 62. Finally, a tenant in St. Louis recently filed a formal complaint claiming her landlord's overly cheerful morning greeting was a form of emotional assault. She argued that being told to have a nice day before she had finished her coffee was an unwanted intrusion into her personal morning gloom and created a hostile living environment. She demanded a no eye contact clause be added to her lease and requested a $100 grumpy morning credit every time the landlord smiled at her in the hallway before 10 in the morning. 63. A property owner in Georgia once issued a formal notice to a tenant for owning too many heavy books. He claimed the weight of a 3-shelf home library was creating a gravitational anomaly that would eventually cause the floor to sag and crush the family living downstairs. He actually tried to implement a $10 monthly knowledge weight tax for every book over a certain thickness, arguing that the tenant was essentially storing unauthorized structural stress inside the apartment. 64. A tenant in Las Vegas filed a complaint insisting his neighbor's lucky bamboo on the balcony was aimed directly at his front door to sabotage his casino luck. He demanded the landlord force the neighbor to rotate the plant 90 degrees or reimburse him for a professional good luck consultant to reset the hallway energy before his next weekend on the Strip. 65. A landlord in Ohio once sent an itemized invoice for $20 labeled as a shower curtain orientation fine. He claimed that because the tenant left the curtain bunched up on the left side instead of the right, it was creating an unbalanced aesthetic that could be seen through the frosted window from the street. He argued this visual disorder was damaging the building's reputation for symmetry and demanded a daily photo proof of centered curtain compliance to avoid further penalties. 66. A renter in Oregon demanded a 40% rent refund because the apartment's walls were too white and were causing him a rare condition he called indoor snowblindness. He claimed the reflected light from the ceiling was making it impossible for him to focus on his work and demanded the landlord pay for a professional painter to redo the entire unit in calming charcoal gray. When the landlord refused, the tenant filed a grievance for chromatic negligence and withheld his security deposit. 67. One landlord in Virginia tried to implement a monthly shoe sole texture fee after noticing a tenant wore hiking boots with deep treads. He argued that the aggressive pattern on the bottom of the boots was assaulting the carpet fibers and causing them to age 3 times faster than expected. He demanded a $15 treadwear bond every month and suggested the tenant only wear smooth-soled ballroom dancing shoes while walking from the front door to the couch to preserve the floor's dignity. 68. A tenant in Florida filed an official complaint claiming the landlord's extraordinarily bald head was a safety hazard. She argued that when the landlord performed outdoor inspections, the sun reflected off his scalp and created a blinding laser beam that was specifically targeting and burning her expensive tropical ferns. She demanded the landlord wear a mandatory wide-brimmed hat at all times or pay for a specialized anti-glare canopy for her balcony to protect her botanical investment from his solar cranium. 69. A landlord in New York City tried to charge a tenant a $50 monthly statistical occupancy adjustment right after the tenant got married. He claimed the unit now had a high probability of future lifestyle expansion, meaning extra showers, extra laundry, and future plumbing wear. The tenant asked how you bill for people who do not exist, and the landlord said, "It's proactive maintenance math. So that's 69 reasons leasing should come with a waiver and a therapist on standby." Now I want blood in the comments. Who's the bigger menace? Landlords who invent fees for photons and breathing? Or tenants who demand refunds because a tree shadow looked mean? Pick a side and defend it like your security deposit depends on it. And if you've got a rental horror story that tops these, drop it. Names optional, chaos required. Hit like if you survived renting without committing a felony, and subscribe if you want more stories that make adulthood look like a prank.